Trump has officially implemented global reciprocal tariffs. Among them, the tariffs on China will be as high as 100%. My friends might be quite surprised. How could it be so high? Didn't he say he would impose an additional 50% tariff? Let me do the math for you. Previously, due to crises such as issues related to Taiwan and fentanyl and so on, a 20% tariff had already been imposed. Then, a few days ago, all of a sudden, the US added another 30% tariff on China. And immediately, China made a reciprocal response. Then Trump, flying into a rage, said that if China didn't revoke its countermeasures by noon on Tuesday Eastern US time, which was early this morning in our time zone, of course, we wouldn't revoke them. That's why the live broadcast of our relevant meeting lasted until nearly 1 o'clock this morning. We really spanned that time period. China not only didn't revoke its measures, but also remained as stable as Mount Tai, as always. Then Trump announced that if China didn't revoke its countermeasures by noon on Tuesday, he would add another 50% tariff. 20% plus 34% is already 54, and adding another 50% makes it 100%. So, barring any unforeseen circumstances, Trump's 100% tariff increase on China has already officially come into effect. Well, now here comes the following questions. There are several aspects. First, what should Chinese foreign trade enterprises do? Before talking about Chinese foreign trade enterprises, first, let's consider China's economy. Does this have any impact on China's economy? And if so, how significant is the impact? Second, what should foreign trade enterprises do? The second question is about the China-US trade war. Now, it can be said that among all the trade wars that the United States is engaged in with other countries around the world, the China-US trade war is the most intense and vigorous. So, has the lowest point arrived? When will the turning point appear? These are matters that everyone cares deeply about. And will it be all downhill from here in the future, or will there be some unexpected turns for the better? Third, whether it's all downhill or there are unexpected turns for the better, these are two different scenarios. Of course, if there are unexpected turns for the better, we definitely need to analyze the specific time nodes. In fact, both Chinese foreign trade enterprises and, as mentioned here, Chinese families above the middle class level will be affected. Well, from the macro aspects I mentioned earlier, let me first make a prediction for everyone. First, does it have an impact on China's economy? A 100% tariff certainly has an impact, and we make no bones about that. Of course, as for what proportion China's exports to the US account for in China's overall GDP, opinions vary. I won't use specific data here to make my point, because China has its own set of data, and the US has its own. The criteria for consideration behind them are different, but at least it's a few percentage points. Of course, during this process, we will also have our own measures, right? Currently, some of the world's major investment banks, mainly Citibank. It should be said that early this morning, while we were still asleep, Citibank had already started to lower its forecast for China's economy this year. We're just presenting this for your reference, and it doesn't affect our confidence in the slightest. But I want to remind you that it's likely that today or tomorrow, and definitely within this week, we should expect the introduction of relatively clear measures to support fiscal policies, especially monetary policies. So, everyone can just wait and see, and at the same time, pay close attention. And if you want to pay close attention, you can follow my videos. So, this can be said to be a game. First of all, we don't hide the fact that such high tariffs, a 104% high tariff, do have an impact on China's economy. But at the same time, we will also introduce some policies. Frankly speaking, today, at least most of the media from European countries such as Germany, France, Switzerland, and Austria, if not all in unison, believe that China's national system can, at this time, make relatively good use of resources. You see, the state-owned entities entered the market a few days ago, right? Judging from the situation yesterday, on one hand, they not only successfully stabilized the stock market, but also boosted people's confidence. This is something that's very difficult to achieve in the United States. Of course, the US can also intervene in the market, but in terms of guiding people's confidence, the national power of the US is obviously not as strong as that of China. Of course, looking at the situation of the trade confrontation between China and the US, if it's a pure confrontation, China would probably suffer relatively more damage than the US. But if you consider the overall situation, including China's national system, the international environment, and the mutual strategic, political, and strategic needs and games between the two sides, it should be said that in the long run, the US will suffer at least greater losses than China. In the short term, from a one-sided and purely economic perspective, perhaps China will suffer more. But China has its national system and various other aspects. So, regarding this matter first, we can't deny that there will be an impact. Second, everyone must stay calm. China's national system can indeed play a very good role in this regard. This reminds me of what Ludwig Erhard, the then Chancellor of Germany, introduced in 1963, more than 60 years ago. It was called the social market economy. There is a German sentence in it, and when translated into Chinese, I remember quoting this sentence on many occasions. The social market economy, in fact, social here represents national power. It has well regulated the relationship between the state and the market. That sentence goes like this: if possible, let the market play a greater role; if necessary, let the state play a greater role. So, what does possible mean? Possible means when the situation is calm and everything is going smoothly. Of course, at such times, the market should play a greater role, since the market is the main body. And what does necessary mean? Necessary means when a crisis comes. Of course, at such times, the state should play a more active role. Now, the China's trade war, frankly speaking, is just like a war or a pandemic. Sometimes it's due to the external environment, and sometimes it's beyond human control. So, when such a crisis arrives, it is precisely this kind of system that can stabilize the economy and people's confidence. This is the first point. Second, how long will it last? Or will it be all downhill? Or will there be some unexpected turns for the better? I think that overall, regarding the overall, structural, strategic, and long-term nature of China-US relations, we should give up our illusions. Giving up illusions doesn't mean preparing for a fight right away or immediately preparing to withstand the pressure head-on. It means giving up illusions, strategically, but tactically. We should seize every opportunity that we can grasp. At the same time, tactically, we should also seize every interface to engage in games and struggles. So, in this sense, the recent game between China and the United States, as I also mentioned in my program yesterday, it's not that China is backing down. It's not that China can solve the problem by having private communications with small countries or regions on behalf of the United States. On the contrary, when two parties meet on a narrow path, the brave one prevails, and in this way, it is more likely to win the so-called respect of the other side. So, in this regard, currently between China and the United States, as I've repeatedly said, it's like two people aiming at each other. As the Western proverb goes, it's about seeing who blinks first. It is a contest of both wits and courage. What exactly does this contest of wits and courage mean? Trump has his cards in hand, and China also has its cards. Trump still has 3 cards up his sleeve in the future. One is the exchange rate card, one is the sanctions card, and the other is the small multilateral card. The so-called exchange rate card means that he will definitely try to force a significant depreciation of the Chinese yuan. To be honest, we have already started taking some measures in this regard. As everyone knows, when foreign trade encounters difficulties, countries often use currency depreciation to make it easier for foreign trade enterprises to export. Of course, on the other hand, for Chinese middle-class families that have international interactions, such as going on overseas trips for shopping or having children studying abroad, etc., they will undoubtedly suffer some temporary losses. Just as foreign trade enterprises need to share the burden with the country, at this moment, it is necessary for the whole nation to unite as one and support each other. China's currency depreciation will be within a certain limit. However, we will complete the necessary adjustments before the United States coerces China. Once we reach that limit, we will not depreciate the currency any further. The second card is sanctions. Sanctions will precisely target certain Chinese financial and high-tech enterprises. I won't go into details about this, but friends in related fields must pay close attention. If you are involved in the financial sector or in high-tech areas related to the United States or areas that can touch the nerves of the United States, you must pay extremely close attention. The third card is that he will play the small multilateral game. Trump doesn't like large multilateral mechanisms. He prefers to form cliques through small multilateral arrangements. Yesterday, Trump's advisor, who is known in the Western world as the tariff liar, Peter Navarro, published an article in the Financial Times. It can be said that right from the start, he laid bare their true intentions. Can I say their wolfish ambitions? Their underlying goal is to bring an end to globalization as soon as possible, to take back the so-called wealth of the United States that has flowed into the hands of foreigners over the past few decades, and to re-establish rules and systems for the world's trade, economy, and even the global geopolitical landscape. This is their fundamental purpose. So, whether it's Trump or Navarro, their goal is not really about the tariffs themselves. Instead, they aim to reset the global geopolitical landscape, the trade landscape, the economic landscape, and the political landscape through this rather outdated means. Since this is the case, the ultimate solution to the problem must be achieved through political strategies. Therefore, we still need to let things play out for a while, as I just said. These are the three cards: the exchange rate card, the sanctions card, and the small multilateral card. China also has its cards. China's restrictions on us services, rare earths, and so on are all cards in China's hand. Moreover, China has an even more important card, which is similar to the US's small multilateral approach. Frankly speaking, it is much easier, smoother, and more effective for China to play the small multilateral game than for the United States. This is because China has a huge market. For any country or any enterprise, once they enter the Chinese market with a population of 1.4 billion, they can basically thrive. So, China can definitely use this market to gain small multilateral support from other countries. Of course, during this process, we need to pay attention to one thing, which I have repeatedly reminded. We need to downplay ideological differences and differences in systems. The future global geopolitical landscape will not be divided based on ideology or political systems. Instead, it will be divided according to the law of the jungle, by power politics, and purely by naked interests. Of course, as noble individuals, we definitely have our own values. But when it comes to the law of the jungle, it's useless to talk about values with Trump. Well, if that's the case, if we can downplay values in our external relations, we will be able to win the support of a large number of small multilateral partners. Domestically, this downplaying of values, frankly speaking, is also beneficial to Chinese private enterprises, which I have mentioned many times. So, the game between these two small multilateral approaches is what will truly determine the future direction. What's more, the US economy will definitely fall into a relatively severe recession in the next 3 to 6 months. Trump himself is well aware of this, and he has already told his supporters about it. He said that this will definitely be a difficult situation, but he believes that he can turn things around, that is, adjust the economic structure and change the entire global structure. Whether he can actually achieve this is another matter. So, how long will this process take? On one hand, there is a saying that the US economy may experience a 60% recession. On the other hand, the two small multilateral mechanisms are being formed simultaneously. In the end, China's national system will be able to support the Chinese economy, while the United States will find it very difficult to completely salvage the situation. I estimate that this process will take 3 to 6 months. For China, as the US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said in an exclusive interview yesterday, he said that he will talk separately with other countries, first with South Korea or Japan, and possibly next with Taiwan, China, and then maybe with the European Union, Canada, and so on. The earliest this whole process could be completed might be in May or June. If it is June, then at least the game between China and the United States will not be resolved through negotiations. It will be resolved through a contest of strength, making both sides feel the pain, especially making the Trump administration truly feel the pain. Only then will the turning point come and things start to look up. And this process is impossible to complete within less than 3 to 6 months. So, my friends, you might ask if it's a severe situation. Well, it's not extremely severe, but you must be prepared to live frugally for 3 to 6 months. Of course, ordinary people may not be too affected. But for foreign trade enterprises, these 3 to 6 months may be a rather tough period, to put it optimistically. So, in my program yesterday, I appealed to the country to provide appropriate and phased subsidies to some foreign trade enterprises that have made significant contributions in the past and are now suffering relatively large losses. This is the kind of help that the country should provide. Let's all work together. The country helps its people get through difficult times, and the people in the country support each other and get through this period together. I believe that in the end, this game will definitely end with China's victory. Thank you all very much for your attention. See you in the next episode. Thank you.